Welcome everyone. We're back live and in living color. You're listening to the new WCEG network at WCEGtalkradio.com. If you're listening, just click on the live stream tab or watch us live on smart TV. Are there dumb TVs out there now? But on your smart TV, via YouTube, and then search for WCEG Network. I'm Norman Carter, your show host for Issues and Answers, and for the next 45 minutes to an hour, I'll be with you. Our program is Issues and Answers. We're the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and on Instagram at WCEG_Talk Radio and at WCEG Network. Join the conversation. Call in or Skype at 1-678-619-1402. Ask your questions, make comments, voice your concerns. Again, our number 1-678-619-1402. The topics and opinions are those of the show host, that's me, and they're sometimes strong, and our guest, Paula Stallworth, not the WCEG network. We thank you for your continued support. Our program today has been dealing with domestic violence, and we're going to continue that on for a few minutes before we may go into something else, unless you, the caller, call in with your concerns, questions, or input. We invite that. Paula, I'd just like to bring up a few statistics that I uncovered there, just in case our listeners out there think that this is not a global epidemic.
Yes.
I checked 3 states in the United States. First, Georgia. 35.1% of Georgia women and 39% of Georgia men experience intimate partner physical violence, sexual violence, and or stalking. Pennsylvania, my home state, 37.7% of Pennsylvania women, 27.5% of Pennsylvania men experience intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner sexual violence, and or intimate partner stalking in their lifetimes. California, out there on the left coast, 32.9% of California women and 27.3% of California men experience intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner sexual violence, or intimate partner stalking in their lifetimes. This is not just a local issue. You are not the only one if you are a victim in that situation. This is a global epidemic. I did have statistics from around the world that I can't find right now, and I know we have listeners in other parts of the world who are with us at the present time. But how do we resolve this?
Again, awareness, education, minimizing, getting rid of the stigma associated with the need to get help emotionally or mentally. While the statistics are alarming, I would venture to say that it's probably higher than what is reported, because much of it doesn't get reported.
For our listeners, our program listeners, and this program will be available on YouTube for quite some time, as far as I know. But are there other resources out there that our listeners can avail themselves of for dealing with this issue?
Yes, absolutely. Every state I know has a chapter for domestic violence. In Georgia, it's the Georgia Commission on Family Violence.
Okay.
There's a website. that you can go on, and there's a plethora of information that and resources that would be helpful. I have with me several pieces that I use in my counseling to bring awareness and just to provide information in our waiting area for anyone who may be suffering from it. There should be a Georgia Task Force Against Domestic Violence in your community. It's usually run through the court systems in Rockdale County. We attend the Georgia Task Force Against Domestic Violence with Judge Nancy Bills, and she and her team do a tremendous job. There is support for survivors of domestic violence and murder-suicide. That is available through the Georgia Commission on Family Violence website. I have some brochures on that. For those who may be in a situation where there is domestic violence, one of the books that I highly recommend is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Because we can't always make that decision definitely. We sometimes need a little assistance, and if there's no one that you can talk to or feel that you can confide in, this book by Lundy Bancroft is phenomenal. Lundy Bancroft and Jack Patrici. Lundy Bancroft also authored Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. I find this book to be I don't know that the right words are there to this. What Lundy Bancroft does is he breaks down various types of abusive men. He even talks about those of us who become victim of domestic violence, how that sometimes happens. He also has another book entitled Why Does He Do That? Devotional, which is written specifically for women who are victims of domestic violence. There's even on a teen level. This one is called, it's from the On magazine, Stopping the Violence, and it speaks to violence on other levels, especially in learning how to properly resolve conflict. Assertive communication, learning how to say what you mean and mean what you say. That is of utmost importance. We have to get to a place where we do not allow ourselves to be silenced. As the media has shown, in most recently, the Me Too movement and other movements where women or others have been victims, we're no longer sitting silently and letting these things go unnoticed. We are reporting them. We are standing up. We are being heard. And we are not dumbing down. There is a power and control wheel that explains physical and sexual abuse and how an abuser uses intimidation, how he or she uses emotional abuse, uses isolation. One of the first things that a man or woman will do when they want to get an individual under their control is to isolate. Mm-hmm. They'll tell you your friends you don't have any friends. They're the only ones you can really count on. They limit your outside connections, networks. They shut them down because they need you to believe that it's only them, and without them, you're lost. They minimize, deny, and blame. So whatever is going on, you will always be the fall guy. You will always be the reason why things are not going as well as they should be.
Self-esteem issue.
Absolutely. They will use the children. They will make you feel guilty about your children. They will use your children to relay messages back and forth. That's not a child's place. Our children need to be able to be children. Our children do not need to have to parentify or parent their siblings. They shouldn't have to parent you or your significant other. And in many cases, they feel they do. Abusers will oftentimes, from a male perspective, use male privilege, treating you like a servant, making all the big decisions, not giving you a part of that, acting as if they're the master of the castle, as if they're the one to define men's and women's roles. I want to disclose for a moment that I've been married to my husband, Thomas Stallworth Sr., for pushing 30 years. And our relationship hasn't always been perfect, but we have learned and how to grow together. And even now, after almost 30 years, if I cook, he will take the dishes from the table, he will wash, he will clean, he will... When I left for my office Saturday, because we had an all-day training, he said, yeah, now I can really get in here and clean. Bathrooms, it doesn't matter. When we were helping to raise two of our little goddaughters, he was right there helping with every aspect of childcare. There wasn't anything that he wouldn't do. A good, strong, healthy man doesn't mind doing whatever is needful. His work is not only outside the house, in the lawn, doing the lawn care, or fixing the house, doing honeydews around the house, or going to work. His role includes helping you, being a team. A man and a woman together can conquer anything if they work together. And it's so important that we realize that we deserve that. He deserves that.
Both parties.
Absolutely. And a man who's not involved in all this is cheating himself. He's cheating himself. As a matter of fact, these kinds of together activities can sometimes act as a, what do I want to call it? I almost had it. I'm having a brain freeze.
We have these moments.
Yes, we do. I mean, it's in the age, I guess. Wisdom. It can serve as a foreplay, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
So you never know. It can really enhance a relationship. It doesn't make a man less than a man because he does all these things. In fact, it makes him more of a man, and it will make your spouse even love you more. So with nonviolent relationships, fairness is what I'm talking about. We're talking about actions that feel safe, talking and interfacing with each other, allowing each other to have voice, and together coming up with decisions that affect your environment, your household. And I'm not saying it's all on the men, because sisters, sometimes we can be the person who's causing a lot of conflict because we maybe grew up with it. We're yellers. You don't have to yell to get your point across. You can speak at a very calm tone. Ask what do you think about this or that? If a person has an idea, help me understand why you think it should be this way or not that way. It's just learning how to conversate. And that's what conversation is. It's receiving and transmitting and receiving, so that together we come up with the best solution. Sometimes the woman is better with the money. Sometimes the man is better with the budgeting. It just depends on who does the job better. But don't keep everything that you do separate from your significant other. If something happens to you, they need to know what to do next. I can't tell you how many situations where a person is no longer a part of the household, and the widow is left wondering, I don't know when bills are due. I don't know who we pay. They're clueless, and that shouldn't be. That's stress that is unnecessary and we can avoid that. It's preventable.
I feel like I'm getting a free marriage counseling.
Well, none of us know it all.
Absolutely.
None of us know it all.
Absolutely.
I'm still learning.
Absolutely.
I love going to conferences, workshops, because I'm always looking to see what I can learn to help me be a better clinician, help me be a better wife, help me be a better mother, grandmother. Yes, I'm a grandmother. In fact, great grandmother as well. So it's just everybody should bring something to the table.
And you're listening to the WCEG network at WCEGtalkradio.com. Our call-in number remains 1-678-619-1402. I'd just like to perhaps go off on a bit of a tangent. I don't sit here as a person who doesn't have any, not just sympathy, but empathy for domestic violence situations. I grew up with that as a child. And there was a lot of alcohol and those type of things in my family. And this, I'd just like to talk a minute about the impact on children. Because at one time, I can remember I happened to be probably about 8 or 9 years old. And at this point, at this particular day, my mother was being beaten so severely that the only relief that I thought that she could get is if I would run past them and get into the kitchen and get to a butcher knife and assault my father with it.
My God.
As I was about to take that action, one of our neighbors, this is back in the 50s, there might have been 1 or 2 telephones in my entire block. Well, one of those people took the initiative to call the police department. And before I could make that step, the police department stepped in and stopped the event. But I like to take that a little bit further, because about 3 or 4 years later, and I lived in North Philadelphia, and there was a big commotion a block away. Summertime. So everybody runs down to the next block. Philadelphia, little narrow streets. I lived in North Philly. If we have any Philadelphia listeners, I lived in the 2200 block of Harlan Street, which no longer exists. But this happened in the 2300 block of Harlan Street. And once the crowd arrived there, and I was among the crowd, I happened to be about 13, 14 years old. There was a man lying on the sidewalk, dead. And what had happened is, this man had been continually beating on his girlfriend, and his girlfriend had an 11-year-old daughter. And to stop the assault, the 11-year-old daughter stabbed this man to death. One blow in the back, he was done. He was dead. And all of us, even back then, and this occurred in the late 50s, the question was, what happens to that 11-year-old child?
That's right.
No, she probably wasn't going to go to jail. But the psychological impact of having, number one, lived with that abuse for, I don't know for how long, but at least it was long enough for her to become not just angry, but incensed enough as an 11-year-old, if you can imagine, an 11-year-old feeling enough of an emotion that to protect a mother that they would actually kill someone to stop the assault on their parent. I think these are the devastating effects that they can have on children, which have long-term consequences. And I'm just reaching out to men and women.
Yes.
You have to consider that what you do today affects things with your child years from now. Absolutely. Not just next year or the year after that, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. In addition, and we're talking about at that moment now, domestic violence in the household has to affect the way your child interacts with their peers.
Absolutely.
Interacts with neighbors. This has a self-esteem factor to it, and also a shame factor to it. So indeed, if one partner is being abused, that child or the children of that household are also being simultaneously abused. But their abuse may not be at that time physical, but it's psychological, which sometimes can be more damaging than the actual physical assault that is evident at the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so sorry that you endured or experienced, and for all of the young children and families who are victims, have been victims, or witnessed, because sometimes witnessing it can be just as devastating. Mm-hmm. So I'm so sorry for all of that. I too have seen firsthand the aftermath of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. At the age of 13, I was hit by a young man that was supposed to be my boyfriend, also at the time growing up in Philadelphia. And because gangs were so prevalent, I was a member of a gang. And that's where a lot of our young people become engaged in relationships before your time. We're not ready for relationships. Our brains are still developing.
Yes.
Our brains don't fully develop until mid to late 20s if there's not been alcohol, drugs, or some other traumatic or brain injuries affected us. So we're not at an age where we can rationally make decisions, executive decisions we call them.
Correct.
So we're very impulsive. We do things without thinking at those younger ages. So we want to be very, very careful about what we're exposed to. Fathers, have a relationship with your daughters to teach them what a healthy relationship looks like. Mothers, have relationships with your sons. Go out to dinner. The whole family doesn't have to go out at the same time all the time. When I married my husband in 91, he had a son. I had a son still at home. So we became a blended family, and I would encourage him. Sometimes you and your son should get out because he's been accustomed to just the two of you. I will go out with my son because he's been accustomed to just the two of us. It doesn't mean that we're a divided family. It means that we take into consideration that each person in the family is important.
Yes.
And we're not trying to erase what was before this new relationship. We want to learn how to blend it in a way that is more acceptable, more loving.
That's important because we're living at a time now where blended families are becoming more the norm than generations ago or years ago. It's just very, very important information. And it's funny. I think about this at church sometime, and it's probably evidence now that a lot of times, and I had a talk with my pastor, is that at times when there's no amen, it's like, am I reaching?
Right.
And sometimes when there not a lot of calls come in, it's not, am I reaching anyone?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times certain subjects are so profound that I won't say people are floored, but they're taking in this information. And this is, again, and we may revisit this topic in the future. This is a very, very serious subject that affects so many people in so many ways, be it in your childhood or in your present day life. And what is happening now is that people are realizing the gravity of it and the long-term effects of it. And you mentioned the Me Too generation. We have organizations now who are coming out and saying, this is wrong. This is something you don't have to accept. But one of the things I wrote an email to someone recently about this is that who was dealing with this person happened to be in Australia, dealing with a domestic violence issue. And they were at their wits' end because every avenue that they turned to wasn't sensitive to her situation. And one of the things that I think that we have to do is resensitize or sensitize our judicial system.
Yes, educate.
Our law enforcement agencies, because for too long, and we take this as someone who was involved in law enforcement, there's a wink and a nod, and that wink and a nod can eventually lead to a death. It can, and that's the, I looking at little statistic here, between 2003 and 2008. It's hard to get these statistics directly up to date because it takes a long time to gather.
Right.
But between 2003 and 2008, 142 women were murdered in their workplace, by former or current intimate partners. This doesn't just stay in the house.
Sure.
And this is part of what we're talking about, is leaving can sometimes not be the easiest thing to do. There are lots of things to consider. I remember, and we're here in Atlanta, where one of my employees had their mate. She was involved in a very abusive relationship, and she was able to get to a shelter, but he knew where she worked. So he came down to the job on the pretense of, I need to talk to her about something. Well, some of us who knew better, and because of my background in law enforcement, I knew exactly what it was, and we handled that by contacting the police. But it is just a horrendous situation. We do have protection orders that people can seek. I know the abuser will tell you, well, it's just a piece of paper. That's not going to keep me from doing anything. Excuse me. But you have to start somewhere.
Absolutely.
You have to start somewhere. And a lot of that, which is involved in contacting people like Paula Stallworth and getting the counseling that you need to begin to look at yourself and be able to define yourself as an individual who doesn't have to accept this type of dehumanizing behavior.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to piggyback on reaching out and getting help. If you're in a situation where you cannot get to a place of counseling or therapy, many of us who are in the field now do telehealth. That means that we can see you via Skype or some other encrypted or secure media way. So we understand that you may not be in a situation where you have the transportation, because sometimes an abuser will make sure that you can't get where you need to go, but you can still get help. Just be very, very cautious and careful in the way that you do it, because we realize that one step out of the norm may create a life or death situation, and we choose life in our communities. We want you to live, but we want you to live well. We want you to have good, strong mental and emotional wellness. I'm working on a book, In Search of Mental and Emotional Wellness, across 12 sectors and beyond. I say that to say that our mental and emotional wellness can affect us in the corporate world. So, like this young woman whose significant other knew where she worked, we need to know that we are safe and well from the boardroom to the break room in corporate America. Our mental and emotional wellness, if we're students or educators, from registration to graduation. We need to know that we're mentally and emotionally well militarily for those who have served in the armed forces from the home front to the front line. For those who may be in entertainment from center stage to backstage. Mental and emotional wellness, I could go on and on, but no matter what walk of life you're from, no matter what level of education or lack of education you may or may not have, you deserve to live with mental and emotional wellness. Again, please reach out to someone that you can trust who can be an advocate for you. There are advocates available for those who are suffering with domestic violence. There's so much out there, but we have to make it clear. We have to put it out there. We have to inform our communities. This needs to be taught or informed from elementary school, preschool, all the way up. And we do play therapy, and I'm going to tell you, children will tell us exactly what's going on in the way that they play. In the way that they play. So a child who picks up the doll and begins to aggressively work with that doll tells us that they have experienced some aggression. If they're pretending to play house, or if they're pretending to see their mother or their father shooting up, trust me when I tell you, when you talk about the effects of violence in the home, it crosses all sectors and beyond.
And if you are in crisis,
yes,
you can reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's SAFE, or 7233. That's the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE, or 1-800-799-7233. You are listening to the WCEG Talk Radio Network, speaking life into the community. And today we are really, literally speaking life into the community.
yes,
This subject of domestic violence, it just will not go away. Daily, you can pick up the newspaper, look at television, and when you see it on television, the paper, it's usually the end results. And what we're trying to do here is limit those disastrous end results
absolutely,
that we see on television, because a lot of times the results are not evidence on what we see on TV. They're evidence in behaviors that are produced in your children. They affect your child's education. They affect your child's interaction with their peers. They affect the way that you perceive yourself. They are reflected in your sense of self-worth. And it's reflected in whether you will be forever in that submissive position where you take on or accept domestic violence. And that shouldn't happen. This is the 21st century. And when you find people who tell you that this is the way that it is, and this gets into another subject that I wanted to get into that we may not have time to get into, these people are your Judas goats. And if you don't know what a Judas goat is a trained goat that leads other goats to the slaughter. And you have to be mindful of those type of people, be they your neighbor, your family member, your priest, or your preacher.
that's right.
You are the captain of your ship. You determine your goals or your future. And the other part of that is, and we talked about that, is working at a healthy relationship with your partner. And if at the onset, this is something that your partner will not go along with, I think, Paula, we have to reach out for other partners.
And sometimes you just need to take a break. If you're between relationships and you're coming out of an unhealthy relationship, it may be time just to take some time to love on yourself. Get to know you. Take time to shake off all of that unhealthy stuff that you went through. We will be celebrating Valentine's Day in a little bit, because these days are flying by.
Mm-hmm.
And learn to love on you. If you love you, then the people you meet will know that in order to be in relationship with you, they have to love you the way you love you. If you're loving yourself in a way that you neglect yourself, you don't take care of yourself, you let people, abuse you, run over you, talk to you any kind of way, that's what they're going to do. You don't have to be arrogant or aggressive in making your statements known, but developing boundaries. The book of Proverbs talks about the city with walls. Like a city built with walls is a person without self-control. Or a city without walls is like a person without self-control. The walls are divine, are there to keep the enemy out and to keep you safe. In the same way, when we develop our relationships, we have to learn how to develop standards and boundaries to keep our enemies out and to keep us safe.
Okay.
You deserve to be treated like a prince or a princess. You are somebody, because God don't make no junk.
You remind me of one of the things I told my daughters when they were coming up, is that know who you are.
That's right.
Be able to define yourself. And part of defining yourself is not being perpetually known as somebody else's somebody.
That's right. I can
and
be somebody with or without.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And be satisfied and successful in your own right, and not necessarily because of someone else. This is the first step, in my opinion, of building the mortar for those bricks that provide that wall of safety around you. Because once it becomes known that you can be an independently functioning individual.
Absolutely.
And not dependent on, your identity is not dependent on someone else.
Yes.
That is the first step in establishing who you are, and also lets the other person know that there's a limit to what they can do or not do.
That's right.
To you or for you.
Right.
This has been such an excellent program. Excellent program.
If just one person makes a decision to live well, then it was worth it. But we know that more than one of you are out there. And this coming Sunday, we will be preaching on love at Cornerstone Church in Snellville, Georgia.
Sounds like a commercial to me.
So
where is Cornerstone?
Cornerstone is in Snellville, Georgia, on Norris Lake Road. So we invite you to come, bring your families, your children, and fellowship in love.
Wow. And I need to remind you once again that the National Domestic Violence Hotline is at 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233. I'd like to thank Paula Stallworth for coming and really enlightening all of us. This is something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, and I think that in so doing, we're reaching out and touching people whom we have no knowledge of, and that's the breadth of the effect of this worldwide community empowerment group known as the WCEG network. This has just been so wonderful, and I thank you so very much. Just as an aside, and I have to switch up here for a minute. We had an initial program here about 2 weeks ago, and our program dealt with law enforcement, and we also got a little bit into religion. And we've been asked to revisit those topics. So our program next week will deal with law enforcement in all of its beauty and all of its ugliness. We will talk about corruption. We will talk about interactions with the police, with their community, particularly violence, unnecessary use of force, the parameters that we all should be guided by for both civilian and police officers. You may know that I've written an autobiography about my experiences with policing. I had a 25-year career, and I will say that I was able to affect changes that not only affected the community in which I worked, but which I found out later on affected communities in Houston, Texas, and in Atlanta, Georgia, and possibly in Chicago, Illinois. But there still remains a lot of work to be done. So I am hoping to get an expert, another expert in policing with us, and perhaps some community input, someone from the community. I'll work on that, but that will be the tenor of our next program, coming up next Monday, be the good Lord willing. But until then, I would like to thank all of you who have listened to our program this week. This has been what I believe to be an important program, what I believe is a program from which you can take value. And this is one of the, if you can see this, one of the brochures that you can take advantage of. It's the Support for Survivors of Domestic Violence, Murder, Suicide. We don't ever want to get to that level. We don't ever want to get to that level. So reminding you again that you're listening to the WCEG network at WCEGtalkradio.com, and we're live streamed. We're live and in living color. And we have a Stopping Violence. Me at Stopping Violence. Okay, Men Stopping Violence, excuse me. It's Men Stopping Domestic Violence. And here is that number. Please take this number down. 1-866-717-9317. That's Men Stopping Domestic Violence at 1-866-717-9317. We have the National Suicide Prevention Hotline.
Yes.
1-800-273-TALK. 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. That's the Suicide Prevention Hotline. I hope you're taking all these down. They're important. You can download Objective Zero, and this is for veterans who feel that they might be in danger of suicide. That's Objective Zero. You can download that on your computer. Text, you can connect to 741-741. That's the Suicide Prevention Hotline. That's text connect, CONNECT. Once you have dialed into 741-741. That's the Suicide Prevention Hotline. And now we have also the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They can be reached at 404-209-0280. That's the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. 404-209-0280. There's so much interest in this topic, and I'm sure Paula will be revisiting this at some time in the future, and hopefully we'd like to have you back, but also people who have lived through this, who have survived through this, who can also offer input to those listeners out there who feel that they have nowhere to turn, that they have to accept this type of behavior. It's just been so enlightening, and
Thank you. I want to thank you for having me. I just also want to let the community know that we do have a survivor of suicide support group that meets. We meet second Thursday of each month at the Listening Ear Counseling Center from 6 to 7:30 every second Thursday at the Listening Ear Counseling Center in Conyers, Georgia. If you are the survivor of someone who has completed suicide, so this is not for persons who have attempted. The Survivors of Suicide Support Group is a group that meets for those whose loved ones have completed suicide. And if you need one in your area, if you go to the national website for suicide prevention, you can find one in your area. But if you're in the Conyers area, please feel free to reach out at 770-929-1470 or our website, www.lecounselingcenter.com. Thanks again for having me.
it's been our pleasure. This has just been. I couldn't ask for a more informative, a more insightful inaugural program than a program on domestic violence. And I really appreciate your being here with me and helping me navigate through a very difficult topic.
Yes.
that has an effect throughout not just our little community here in the United States, but worldwide.
Indeed.
And we do have a worldwide listening audience because, after all, we are the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group.
Amen.
And this is what we do. And this is the type of programming that we'll be bringing to you in the future on Issues and Answers with Norman Carter as your host. And this week we have Paula Christian-Stallworth as our guest. And we are just going to grow from here on the WCEG network. So thank you all
so
for
much.
listening.
God bless you.
And this has been wonderful. And my advice to all of you, and it's a very apropos right now, is to remember these fateful words. It's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. Keep that in mind
Amen.
as you walk through life.
Amen.
Thank you for listening.